Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be going over Chapter 14, the Federal Bureaucracy, and finishing up talking about how they're regulators, all right, how they are controlled, and kind of what is their impact in terms of the scope of government. So, for our bureaucracy, our objectives for today, we're going to describe how bureaucracies regulate and assess deregulation and alternative approaches to regulation. We're going to identify the means of controlling the bureaucracy and assess the role of iron triangles and assess the role of unelected bureaucrats in American democracy and the impact of bureaucracy on the scope of government or the role of government within our system. So, to begin with, ladies and gentlemen, one thing is that we have a free enterprise system, and with this free enterprise system, we believe that it's kind of free market, free for all, but that's not the case. Actually, we have a lot of agencies that regulate our industries. We have the SEC, which regulates Wall Street. We have the FCC, which regulates what's being put on TV. You have multiple different agencies that regulate in terms of, like, for example, the environment, in terms of business practices, all those different things. And the thing is that we have a very kind of wide range of agencies that help enforce the laws that are being passed by Congress, and businesses have to listen to them because it's very, very, very important that they do that because it's being done in essence to help protect the population. Now, regulation wasn't always the thing. If anything, before it was mostly left up to the states, and if anything, states really didn't do much, and regulation doesn't really go into effect until 1887, when you have the first regulatory agency, the Interstate Commerce Commission, which was created to regulate the railroad services, because farmers were kind of complaining about these price gouging costs for shipping their products from one place to another. So one thing is that this system that we've created of regulation is there to keep businesses in check. We don't have a full free market system. All right. And the thing is that in order for there to be regulation, it's really up to Congress to determine what powers is Congress giving to the bureaucracy in order to regulate what they are going to be looking at, whether it be railroads, whether it be airlines, whether it be the internet in particular, with like Facebook and Twitter and so forth, because there's potentially something going to happen maybe in the next few years regarding that. We will see. But all regulation contains a grant of power from Congress, a set rules and guidelines, and a means of enforcing compliance with these regulations. And the enforcement does vary. It depends on how forceful a an administration wants to be. So, in terms of being lax or being, very strict on the regulations. So now there's two types of regulation. There's command and control policy, and then the incentive system. Command and control policy, usually that one is where you have the government basically telling businesses, this is what you got to do, either do it or else. And if they do not meet the compliance, then they will be fined. And it's kind of a forced compliance. And many businesses hate this, actually. The reason for it, because no one really likes to be told what to do, right? So instead, what we end up having is we have a kind of a combination. We do have the second, which was an incentive, which is like we create market-like strategies in order to help push companies become, like, for example, more green. Like, for example, under the Obama administration, they were looking at creating more green energy, and they were willing to give tax breaks to companies that ended up embracing green energy. And so that's one way you have an incentive of a tax break or a tax incentive that's put there. Usually when you're looking at regulation, this might work better than command, just like because, like I said, people don't want to be told what to do. Instead, they want to be said, oh, there's an opportunity for you to meet our requirements and what our goals are as a regulatory agency, and you will benefit from it through a tax break or through some type of incentive. Now, one thing that has developed over time has been this push for deregulation. And the reason for that is because regulation has its critics, all right? If anything, there are some certain problems that are perceived with regulation. And also there is a cost. One thing is that because of regulation, all right, it may lead to a rise in prices. Because you have, for example, if you have people working in let's say a chemical plant, well, you have to provide the tools for them to be able to work safely in that plant. You're supposed to provide them with, ventilators, protective equipment, eyeglasses, all that stuff. But if you're China doesn't necessarily have to do that. Right? So because of that, that's an extra cost, and so that is transferred over to consumers. So you end up potentially having higher prices because of regulation, and it can make things be more expensive. It also does hurt America's competitive advantage because if we're paying people a living wage or higher wage than other parts around the world, well, it's going to stand to reason that they're going to be paying or they're going to be charging less for their products because they don't have the same stringent guidelines as we do. And another thing is that sometimes deregulation doesn't really work that well in terms of reaching the goals that are outlined. So let's say it's protecting species, or if it's pollution. But should we get rid of it? Is that something that we should be doing as a society? The thing here is this: is that this is up for debate, and it constantly goes back and forth. Now, critics of regulation will cite like various different failed policies, and they'll say, this is why we shouldn't have this agency or that agency. Now, what are the hazards of deregulation? Well, when we have deregulation and lax enforcement of regulations have resulted in, for example, the environment getting hurt, and you have a lot of environmental pollution. With the 2008 financial meltdown, I've made reference to this before, where you had banks saying, "Don't regulate us. We know what we're doing," and then all of a sudden, the market crashes and go, "Oh, sorry, we didn't realize we were doing this, and we need guidance." And now they're coming back and saying, "We know what we're doing. Let us be." So, you know. And so the thing is that there's usually what will happen is that when you have deregulation, it may lead to potential collapses within different industries or problems within the different industries. So, yeah. Now, one thing is that these bureaucracies are in charge of regulation, but sometimes, it's very difficult to control them. And so, what we end up having is that you have different agencies that are trying to be controlled by different branches. So let's kind of look at that. So the president, how does the president try to control the bureaucracy? Well, one thing that he does is that he appoints the agency heads. So, like for example, President-elect Biden's coming in. I think he's announcing today who his cabinet people are going to be, and so by choosing the heads of the agencies, he's going to be able to say this is the vision of this agency. So, under President Trump, you had more lax environmental protections under the EPA. Potentially under Biden, you're going to see a reversal of that. More enforcement of environmental protection laws and stuff like that. And whoever's at the top, they're the ones who lead the agency. And the hope is that they will bring the bureaucracy under that same vision. Doesn't always work, but that's kind of the idea behind it. The president can issue executive orders. And what that basically means is that the president issues an executive order which has the force of law, but is not necessarily a law. And because it is an executive order, the bureaucracy has to follow it. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to follow it all the time, but they might, drag their feet. There's a potential for that. Um, you know, but these executive orders, um, you know, uh, they're not always implemented, and really, sometimes you might have pushback from the agency heads or even the senior executive, um, the senior executives who are part of that particular agency. Another way that presidents try to alter or that try to kind of keep the bureaucracy in check is potentially altering their budget. So either shrinking it or increasing it. So if they follow what the president wants, they might get an increase, which might send a signal to the agency, hey, if you're doing this and continue to do this, we're going to still support you. Sometimes they might try to cut the agency's budget. By doing that, it limits how much power that agency has. And then the last thing is that you have the reorganization of agencies. And so, like, for example, a few agencies that have tried to be reformed or kind of eliminated have been like the Department of Education, the Department of Energy. Um, there has been kind of this push to try to get rid of the Department of Education at the federal level. But it hasn't worked out. And part of the reason why is because the bureaucracy has kind of kept a check on it in the sense that they will go to Congress, get the supporters of Congress, and sometimes they won't let that agency be eliminated or that department be eliminated because they might convince members of Congress that this is a very important cabinet position. Usually, Republicans are for getting rid of certain departments like the environment, um, the education one. And the energy because they're viewing those as being more state rather than national. Yeah, you end up having that, the potential of a reorganization, which did happen in 2002 with the Department of Homeland Security, where you had different agencies that were brought under one. Now, how does Congress try to control the bureaucracy? Well, here's the thing: is that Congress relies on the bureaucracy because one of the things that Congress does is that it has constituent services. So it provides services to its people within their district or states. And the thing is that they rely on the bureaucracy to carry out the laws, and they definitely want to make sure that they're carrying out the laws efficiently and effectively. Um, but it can be difficult. All right. How does Congress try to control them? Well, one thing is that they can influence who's going to be in charge of an agency. And so they can, if a president is trying to put someone in there that might want to limit the power of that agency or limit the role of that agency, Congress can step in and say, no, we want someone else. And that's perfectly okay. All right. Congress can also um, alter the agency's budget because, they have the power of the purse. And so the thing is that they can tell the agency if you don't do what we're telling you to do, we're going to cut your funding, and they have the power to do that. Um, Congress can hold hearings, and that's where they call in the agency heads and basically say, "What are you doing? Why aren't you following the rule of law? Why aren't you following what we told you to do, or we believe what you should be doing?" And so the thing is that this is that legislative oversight. Congress has that power to call them in and ask for, answers to the questions that they have in terms of what they're doing. Also, Congress can, and this is one thing that they do have, they can rewrite legislation to force agencies to do what the spirit of the law or whatever rule they're trying to push forward. They can rewrite the legislation and pass the legislation, and now that bureaucratic agency has to follow what the new law is saying it by making it more detailed. Because remember, the bureaucracy sometimes has a lot of discretion, and sometimes Congress creates these really wide-reaching goals, and sometimes it's very difficult for Congress to label every little thing, and the bureaucracy just kind of makes these rules based on what they assume is what Congress wanted, and so Congress has the power to kind of become more specific as to what they want them to do. So, with this, so we have the president that tries to control, you have the Congress which tries to control, and that control can be limited because Congress, has other people who try to influence, or well, the bureaucracy has other people who try to influence as well. And takes us into these iron triangle and issue networks. The iron triangles are also known as sub-governments. Pretty much iron triangles is a name given to the relationship that can develop between like the agency and the industry that it's regulating, as well as the committees and the subcommittees in Congress that make the policy in the area. So, for example, the Congressional Committee on Aging, the Social Security Administration, and the senior citizens interest groups like the AARP are all likely to be in favor of increasing Social Security benefits. And so the thing is that what they would do is they would support each other and basically say, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, and we all kind of work together to get this going. And come election time, they will help. So by doing this, you end up having kind of a trading, a quid pro quo, basically, is what it is. A trading of like, powers and kind of favors for each, because each one can provide some type of support to each other. Now, recently the system of governments have become overlaid with an amorphous system of issue networks. And so this has led to more widespread participation in bureaucratic policy making. And this opening of the policymaking process complicates the calculations and decreases the predictability of those involved in the stable, a relatively narrow relationship of sub-governments. And what we mean by these issue networks is that you have not only now these, the bureaucracy, the congressional committees, the interest groups, but you also have media, you have social groups. So there's more that's now coming into play. Now, although iron triangles have dominated policymaking for decades, they are slowly breaking down. Part of it is because, um, you know, uh, because of changes within the demographics, within what people want to see. Like the example that they gave in your reading was the nuclear power. All right. Also, they talked about the tobacco lobbying and stuff like that. So the thing here is this: is that while iron triangles are very powerful, right? They are breaking down because there is more checking into them, and if something starts to seem shady, there might be a push for like reform. So so if we look at this, make sure you look at this iron triangle, and kind of how they support each other, and understand how the interest group supports the congressional subcommittees and committees and members of those committees. How the bureaucracy can put pressure on the bureau. I'm sorry, how the congressional subcommittees and committees can put pressure on the bureaucracy, and how the bureaucracy benefits that interest groups that's there, and how it kind of all is the quid pro quo. Um, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. We all help each other. Now, in terms of the bureaucracy and democracy, basically the bureaucracy is unelected. Right? They are unelected. They are, there to help carry out um, the the laws that are being passed by Congress. Now, one thing is this: is that um, the other branch of the that is not elected is the courts. And so the thing is that now it would be theoretically be possible to elect all judges, but it would be impossible to elect millions of bureaucrats. And that is one thing is that why we have a civil service. We need these employees that are fairly representative of the population, much more than we need the elected officials. All right. And one thing is that these individuals, help carry out and carry out the smooth functioning of our government. And so the thing is that even though they're not elected, they are supposed to be as unbiased as possible. But as we know, that could come into play in terms of their responsiveness or how, it's not to say that, these people aren't human beings. And so they might have a particular interest that may contradict, but they are required to carry out whatever laws Congress has pushed forward. And finally, is the government out of control? So one thing is that the bureaucracy is huge. It's over 2 million people. All right. Um, Basically, bureaucracies they naturally seek to expand their size, their budgets, and authority. But they have not always succeeded. If anything, you have seen a shrinking of the bureaucracy in the last 40 years. And the thing is that the reason for that is because you've had some pushes for deregulation, reorganizing some of those checks that have been put in by Congress and the president. Um, Also, we've had like the privatization. You've had freezes of positions. And the thing is that um, some people have begun to question as to, well, if the government isn't that big, it might be that it's too small in order to carry out the job that it has in terms of trying to keep us safe, in terms of regulating the food, drugs, prescription drugs, as well as illicit drugs. You're looking also at you know uh, dairy, anything that is a part of the economy. And so the thing here is this: is that um, it might be too small, but it depends on the political philosophy of the people who are in power to decide if the bureaucracy is too big or if it's too small. And one thing is that the bureaucracy cannot stop deregulation. Deregulation is something that has come in, and we'll see if we will continue to do deregulation. Congress and the president can deregulate. Usually, sometimes you will have the bureaucracy that will stand against it, and So, ladies and gentlemen, so tomorrow you guys have your test. All right, it'll be on chapter 13 and 14. Review those. Make sure that you complete your study guides and be ready for tomorrow. All right, I'll see you all tomorrow. Have a great day.